Verse of the day. Today's verse of the day, I'm going to talk about how God makes the impossible possible through our surrender and our obedience, and why it's so important that we align our perspective with His, and how that has an effect on improving the lives of others. And so, we're going to jump straight into our verse of the day, and it comes out of Ezekiel 37, 1 through 6. And it says, "The hand of the Lord was on me, and brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord, and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them. And I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, 'Son of man, can these bones live?' And I said, 'Sovereign Lord, you alone know.' Then he said to me, 'Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." God wills us to move in a way that gets us out of our own way, such as putting feet to our faith and taking not so steady footsteps out and upon seemingly uncertain waters, for the sake of walking in a purpose that would otherwise seem impossible from a worldly perspective. The faithfulness of God is proved in our obedience and our surrender to move within His will and at His word. And it is in this space that His grace is most effectively displayed, using the unusable to prove the unprovable. This is how God moves the hearts of those who have hardened themselves wholly apart from Him. Our obedience means the potential of freedom for those who have yet to see Him. So for those that have rebelled and found themselves in ruin and utter destruction, God moves in unexpected ways to prove His own love for them, to tell sons and daughters that He is not done with them. And what I see revealed in this is what I call a kind of cyclical fulfillment, in that God willed and breathed in us His image from the beginning, and now reconciles and restores that image of light and love for the reigniting and reproduction of that image in another and another and another, through every breath that we willingly take and offer for His sake. And so we must not let the fear or wisdom of man divert us from God's plan, for our brethren will suffer for our inability or unwillingness to shine. So hear me now when I say this, for this is especially true for the believer. Just because it seems impossible to the flesh does not mean you have a right to silence the spirit and remain in any way still. 1 Corinthians 1:18 tells us, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." What the world, that thing we should no longer belong to, would call impossible, our Father breathed into existence, brought from nothing into all possibility. And when the world would count it all as loss, our Father would bankrupt heaven, making a way through grace to have it restored from a place of death to a place of reconciliation and abundant life, and then go on to call on us to do the very same, that we would believe on Him receiving this grace and so become a vessel for the very word of life that He has so graciously given to us, and in so doing reproduce that truth as it brings new life, as it grows and as it moves through us. But how is this truth reproduced in our life through me if none of this is truly applied in my life, if I believe none of it about myself? If I say that I believe in the gospel, if I pick up His word and say aloud that this is truth, but I never actually apply it to my life, how will I ever actually become the light that He has called me to be? And that's kind of the point, right? The Father's made us a promise, and the one who says that we can find our fulfillment in this promise is the one who actually applied the sacrifice of His life to it, for the sake of paving a way for its fulfillment. And so as His image reflected, our ability to be effective is clearly measured in what we are willing to apply or sacrifice of our own lives. You see, I have to believe what His word says is true, especially the parts that my flesh are opposed to, such as the natural inclination to cling on to something as simple as words and phrases like our own lives, which is not exactly correct rhetoric when it comes to a life that ought to be surrendered over to Christ. According to His word, my life is no longer my own, right? And so if there is power of life and death in the tongue, produced from an overflowing abundance of the heart, and my heart is a vessel for which others will inevitably drink from, what then does a lacking of intentionality in my faith mean for what it is I will surely pour out in others' lives? Simply put, what I mean is, if I can't even sacrifice my language over to Him who sacrificed everything for me, how will I ever get to the place of putting action to my faith when it comes to loving my neighbor the way that Christ first loved me? Surely I cannot breathe or speak into or over someone else's life if I am not breathing or speaking His truth into or over my own. Jesus states that the two greatest commandments are first to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, and soul, and the second being like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so my ability to do comes from the aiming of my pursuit in the direction of Him and what He's already done, aligning myself rightly with Him through relationship and time spent in His Word, putting my trust in what He says I can do and who He says that I am in Him. So if He says that I'm a son, then I am a son. And so I wake up in the morning and I walk in sonship intentionally with the authority that a son would have. If He says that I'm forgiven and no longer a slave to sin, then I see myself as such and intentionally walk out my day in the knowledge of that forgiveness and the truth of the righteousness He has made available to me through His sacrifice. And I do this no matter how I feel. And this is really important, so I'm going to say it again. No matter how I feel, because I am not defined by how I feel or how it's going or what I've done, because what it is that I am defined by, on the other hand, is who He is and what He's already done for me, so that I could find my way back to restoration and sonship. So again, because it's worth reiterating, no matter how my day is going or how I happen to feel, I am intentional about narrowing my focus on Him and who He says that I am, out of my obedience and surrender to the Word that I know well and the relationship that I have, because I have rested in His presence and I have spent time in His Word. And if there still is any confusion, the proof of whether or not my pursuit is genuine is found in asking what is clearly the obvious question to me. And for that, we go back to a throwback to our verse in 1 Corinthians. So, firstly, am I looking to His Word, and am I actually spending any time at all in His presence? And when I do look at His Word and to His Word and what it says about me, is it truth to me or is it foolishness? And if I'm being honest with myself, am I only receiving impartial truths and portions of His Word that tend to benefit a way that I see is right over who He would have me become and what it is He would have me do through the surrendering of my will for His? Again, just because it doesn't make sense to my flesh does not mean that I have the right to suppress the will of God. Quite the contrary, in fact. Giving your life to Christ means that you are no longer your own. You were bought at a price. In fact, you never belonged to you in the first place. That self-centered mentality is what Christ paid a price to rescue you from, and it is for the benefit of your spiritual well-being that you recognize that. So we have to get away from this ideology that we have any right to be anything that He's not. And yes, that means making my flesh uncomfortable on purpose. And if I have actually made the choice of giving my life to Christ, then the aim of my eyes should be an ever-narrowing focus on Him. And I would argue that this is especially true and is especially fruitful in my pursuit of a growing faith when it does not make sense to me. Like Peter walking on water, everything that the world taught and everything that his flesh discerned about his ability to do this surely cried out in opposition against the truth of what Christ said he could do in that moment, and yet still he walked just as Jesus did, while his eye, mind you, remained aimed rightly on Christ. So I can't say that I know about yours, but my Bible tells me no excuses, one or the other, gather or scatter. So then I say to you, intently choose the aim of your pursuit, and I caution that you do so wisely, because ignorance is not an option. Hosea 4:8 tells us that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And as we just read in 1 Corinthians, the truth is the power of God in us who are being saved. And as His image, it is on us to have His glory on full display for those who are not in alignment with His identity or His will. For what hope is there for those who are meant to see the light shining in us if we fail to see it in ourselves?